Greetings, everyone, and thank you very much for watching this video presentation. Let me first introduce ourselves. My name is Dr. Gloria Ledwaba, and I'm with Dr. Mary Clasquin-Johnson, and you know that we are the lecturers for this module. Let me start with the study material. First of all, please remember that this module offers the basics of inclusive education. In terms of the study materials, I'm quite sure that you all have the TAT letter 101. This TAT letter provides you with all the information regarding the module. You also have TAT letter 001, which includes assessment task. In addition to the TAT letters, you have the study guide as well as 2 readers, which have been uploaded under additional resources. There is no prescribed book for the module, and many of you have asked the reason why don't you have the textbook. As I stated earlier, this module addresses the basic information of inclusive education. And this basic info is found in the readers that are freely available. So you don't need to buy any textbook. That is the first reader. Building or Education White Paper 6, Special Needs Education Building and Inclusive Education and Training System. I view this document as the Bible for inclusive education. Why the Bible? Because everyone who works with all learners should have it. And that is the reason it is freely available from the Department of Basic Education's website. And this is the key policy document that mandates the implementation of inclusive education in South Africa. And the second reader is the policy on screening, identification, so this one, or this document provides you with detailed information on the process of the implementation of inclusive education. For example, how to identify, how to assess, and how to support learners in schools. And these are the 2 key documents that you'll need when completing this module. Now, in terms of the required assessment, you know that you have assignment 1, which I believe many of you have completed it. The second assessment task is assignment 2. And this one, I'm quite sure that some of the students have already submitted it, while others will be submitted of June. And at the end, you are going to write exam. I must indicate that there is no portfolio for this module. 2, and finally, you write the exam. So ignore any message that says you need to submit a portfolio. So as you engage with the module, I'm sure that you have realized that it includes the following. It includes number 1, the history of education in South Africa, as well as policies that compel schools to shift from discrimination of learners in need of additional support. It also includes the definition of the concept inclusive education. The second theme, different models guiding inclusive education. So under these models, you write it models such as Bronfen-Brenner ecosystemic model, the medical model, as well as the social model. It also includes barriers to learning, the process of screening, identification, assessment, and support, and the final theme discussed in the model is the concept of curriculum differentiation, which is the key strategy to meet diverse learning needs of learners in schools. So now, in this presentation, we are going to focus on 3 things. Number 1, we'll look at the history of education in South Africa. We'll define the concept inclusive education, and we'll also talk about mainstreaming and inclusion. So where did it start? Where did inclusive education start? Because previously, or many years ago, from 1970s, when I was still at school, there was nothing called inclusive education. So what I want to indicate is that globally, or inclusive education globally, did not develop in a vacuum. It has been driven by various international and national policies, legislations, and movements that all mandate the elimination of exclusion and discrimination for learners who need additional support, including those with special educational needs. Meaning that there were many international and national policies that force schools or that force the education system to move away from discrimination of learners in need of additional support. So as I've indicated that there are many international policies, but here I've only listed only 3. The first one that I've listed, you can see, is the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Number 2, the Salamanca Statement. And the last one, the Dakar Framework of Action. So these are some of the international policies that mandate inclusion of all learners. Not only inclusion that they say all learners must be provided with opportunities to access quality education. The national policies, we have the South African Constitution, the South African School Act, the Education White Paper 6, the one that I spoke about, and the Policy on Screening, Identification, Assessment, and Support. So these are some of the policies that mandate that all learners must be provided with an opportunity to access quality education. I also want to indicate here that after 1994, there has been major transformation in South African education system. And the first movement that took place was the appointment of 2 bodies by the Ministry of Education by then, and this took place in 1996. So the 2 bodies I'm talking about is the National Commission on Special Needs in Education and Training, and as well as the National Committee for Education Support Services. The role of these teams was to investigate and make recommendations on all aspects of special needs and support services in education and training in South Africa. In other ways, these 2 bodies were appointed so that they can go out to all South African schools to investigate how education and support services were offered to all learners. So I'm going to indicate, because I think we were disrupted, is that the first movement towards education transformation in South Africa was the appointment of 2 bodies by the Ministry of Education by then, and this took place in 1996. The 2 bodies that I'm talking about is the National Commission on Special Needs in Education and Training, as well as the National Committee for Education Support Services. So the role of the teams was to go out to the schools to investigate how education and support services were provided for all learners in schools. So that was the first movement that took place to transform the South African education system. Now let's see what these 2 bodies found. So the first finding, remember, they went out to all the schools in South Africa to investigate the provision of education for all learners. Now, the first finding was that specialized education and support services were predominantly provided for small percentage of learners with disabilities within special schools. When we talk about support services, we refer to specialized services such as speech therapy, physiotherapy, family support, etc., etc. And when we talk about this service is being offered to a small percentage. I just want to give an example. Let's say there were 100 special schools in South Africa, and out of these schools, support services were provided to only 20 of those schools. And you can see that is quite a small percentage. That was the first finding. The second finding was that these support services were provided on a racial basis, with the best human physical resources reserved for schools that catered for white learners, meaning that schools situated in poor and Black communities were completely ignored. No service was offered for disadvantaged learners. Most learners with disabilities have either fallen outside the system because there were no support available to them. In other words, their learning needs were ignored. In terms of accessibility to curriculum, they found out that the curriculum and education system as a whole have generally failed to respond to the diverse learning needs of learner population, resulting in massive number of dropouts, push out, as well as failures, meaning that the way learners were taught, when we talk about the issue of curriculum, so we refer to the way learners were taught, the way they were assessed, the manner in which their learning materials were developed, the structure of teaching and learning environment, they all did not meet learning needs of many learners. So as I've indicated that many learning needs of most of the learners were ignored. For instance, if you have a learner in your class who needs more time to complete the task, and teacher two have a learner who require more resources to understand the content. So you can see that this learning needs or the learning needs of the two learners are not the same. So as I've indicated that those diversity amongst learners were completely ignored. Finally, most of the learners were excluded in the education system based on their characteristics such as language of communication, cultural practices, abilities or disabilities, place of origin, socioeconomic background, and many more. So in other ways, many learners experienced barriers to learning, and those barriers were not attended to. So I'm going to talk about the last issue here, and we'll continue next time. Then based on the findings, the two teams also came up with their recommendations. They recommended that quality education should be provided for all learners. That is the first recommendation. Secondly, they've recommended that learners who experience barriers to learning or barriers to learning amongst learners should be identified as soon as possible. The learning environment should be free and accessible for all learners. The next finding, the next recommendation was that the system as a whole must develop the curriculum that is more flexible, meaning that the teaching, assessment methods, resources, and the learning environment must meet the learning needs of learners. They've also recommended that the rights of the families, educators, and learners must be promoted. This also means that the interest of the families towards education of their children must be respected. The team again recommended the development of programs for education or the educators. This implies that teachers must be developed time to time on various inclusive educational practices, either through or in-service teacher training programs. The educational support services and human resources and support must be available for all learners. And finally, or last but not least, the intersectional collaboration must be promoted. We usually say it takes a village to raise a child. This implies that ensuring quality education for learners should not be a one-man's approach. Everyone must be involved. So when we talk about intersectoral collaboration, we mean that there should be collaboration between various sectors, such as the collaboration between Department of Education and Department of Health, Department of Education and Department of Social Development, Department of Education, as well as Department of Social Safe and Security. So this is what we mean when we talk about intersectoral collaboration. And finally, they've suggested that the funding provision must be revised to redress historically disadvantaged institutions. So I think this is all for now. Next time, we're going to talk about the definition of the concept inclusive education. What is it, as well as the principles of inclusive education? I've made sure that this video presentation is about 15 minutes, so that you must not be, you must not be tired to listen to it. So it will be 15 minutes until you write the exam. I'll ensure that every week we have at least 2 video presentations. And thank you for watching.